Agradecer al profesor Badin por su invitación. Estoy muy más que contento esta semana. Y también a todo el equipo, a Pamela y todos los demás por la organización, que fue estupenda. Entonces, muchas gracias. Yo voy a hacer la presentación en inglés, porque creo que mi español será bastante suficiente para eso. So I will switch to English. So what you see on this picture, it's a double-strand DNA, so a short piece of DNA, which is traversed by an alpha particle of very high energy, mega electron volt alpha particle. And so what you see, all these bubbles are representing the electron density which is deformed when the particle is going through the DNA. So this is what we are trying to understand. We try to understand at the molecular level what is the effect of ionizing radiations on biological matter. And we try to do that with first principle simulation. So all the things I will show you today have been done by very talented students and postdocs, especially Xiaoqing, Aurelio, Angela, Xiaozong, visiting PhDs also from Latin America, Norberto and Felix, and also some collaborators in France and in Canada. So I will try to first start to define what are ionizing radiations. So ionizing radiations are radiations that ionize molecules. It's as simple as this. So they can be of two types. One type are high energy photons, like X-ray photons, gamma photons. So they will interact with matter, and through constant and photoelectric effect, they will expel electrons from the molecule. Another types of ionizing radiations are high energy particles. So for example, protons, helium, electrons, positrons, and so on. So if they are sufficiently fast, they will also interact with matter because they are charged particles. They will interact with the electron cloud. The electron will get excited, and eventually they will escape the molecule. So why it's important to study ionizing radiations? It's important in medicine and biology. So it's known that ionizing radiations, they will damage DNA proteins. This can cause cancer, accelerated aging. So these are really, really bad for the health. On the other hand, they are used in radiotherapies. You can be treated for certain types of cancers using this type of ionizing radiations. In this case, we will use the ionizing radiations to kill the cancer cells. So it's important to understand this in this context. But that's not all. It's also really important if you are interested in astrochemistry, because if you go to the interstellar space, I've never been myself, but if you go there, you will, the molecules are always exposed to ionizing radiations. Especially protons. So if people who want to understand the chemistry taking place in the interstellar media, you need to understand what are the effects of these ionizing radiations. It's also important in our space industry and space exploration. For example, if you want one day to send people on Mars, on the Moon, one big issue is to understand the effects of these ionizing radiations. Well, first on the people who will be there, but also on the material composing the spacecraft, because they are also likely to damage the electronic devices. And so many people also are trying to devise materials that are resistant against cosmic radiations. And finally, an application where it is extremely important is it is in nuclear industry. In France, we use a lot of nuclear power to produce energy. And so it's a big concern because ionizing radiations, they will ionize the reactors of the nuclear plants. And also in all the post-chemical treatments of all the effluents of the nuclear plants, well, they are made of radioactive elements that produce ionizing radiation. And so it will also affect all these chemical processes. So in our case, in fact, we are essentially focused in our say in biology. So I like to emphasize that radiation chemistry is, to my point of view, completely different from photochemistry, for at least 3 reasons. In radiation chemistry, the energy that is deposited into the molecule is really huge. So typically tens of electron volts per molecule. So quite often it's almost the atomization energy. In photochemistry, usually you consider very smaller types of excitation, just a few easy. That's the first difference. Another difference is that the energy is not localized and deposited only on one given molecule, but it is widespread. Why is it so? Here I have an example. So it's a big biological system. So it's DNA folded around a core of proteins. So this is what is called a nucleosome. This is under this form that most of your DNA is folded into your cells. And imagine that you have an alpha ionizing radiation that is going through. In fact, energy will be deposited all the way where the projectile is going through. It will not be the energy deposited on only one spot, but really on the nanometer scale. So that's again another difference. And because they are ionizing radiations, electrons are emitted. So they are called low energy electrons because they have just a few electron volts of kinetic energy, but they are abundantly produced all the way, and these secondary electrons themselves, they irradiate the surrounding material. So at the end, you have a very, very complicated type of processes that we would like to understand. So I'm a physical chemist, so if I try to put some ideas in terms of physical chemistry, it's quite useful to represent this double, with this diagram with 2 axes, a time axis and a scalar axis, to see that ionizing radiations are really inducing multi-scale dynamics. So we start usually by the deposition of energy, so the interaction of the ionizing radiation with matter, and this is taking place at the attosecond time scale, so 10 minus 18 seconds. So it's a very, very short time. At this time scale, only the electrons have time to move because they are the particles that are light enough to move. So the energy is deposited, and this is shaking the electron cloud. So the electrons are moving. So you have a time window, attosecond, femtosecond, where you essentially have electronic motion. But of course, after some time, the nuclei, the atom nuclei, start to respond, of course, to the excitation. And you start to have a very complicated non-adiabatic electron-nuclear dynamics, so where you have a coupled motion between electrons and nuclei. And because you have a lot of energy which is present in the system, you may have at this stage a lot of bond breaking and bond formations. But of course, the energy is dissipates slowly, and so the system goes back slowly to a more stable situation. And after the picosecond, let's say, you start to have ultra-fast chemistry and more standard chemistry, involving all the species that have been produced in the very first time scales. And if you are interested in biology, then you will wonder how this chemistry will affect the structure and dynamics of DNA, of proteins, how the cell will also try to respond, and so on. So people have investigated this for many years. And we could say that today, this part of the diagram is rather well understood. They have been really, you could fill the room by papers on this type of things. But below the picosecond and below picosecond, very few things are known. And there is one reason for that, is that the time scale of experimental setups to investigate radiation chemistry, they have the best people can do at the present time is a picosecond. So there are few experiments where you can start to investigate things that are taking place on the picosecond time scale. So it means that below we don't know what is really happening. So this is a part which is not really well known, and below attosecond, femto, picosecond, very, very little is known. So this is where we would like to work. There is one thing also which is important. If you are theoretician but open to, of course, to experimental approaches, is that now the physics community is really active in developing attosecond pulses. So methodologies that really allow to look at the matter at the level of the attosecond timescale. I don't know if you realize, but this is absolutely outstanding. And so people start to have insights here. So it's also a reason why it's good that theoreticians start to tackle this type of problems, because experiments are now coming in the literature, and we need theory to understand this. But to do that, we need to develop dedicated computational approaches that allow you to look at this part. So the outcome, so the outcome of my presentation will be the following. I will first give you a few details about the methodologies that we are developing in Orsay to deal with these very short time scales. And then I will take two examples to be more concrete, to see what we can do with this type of methodologies. So one on the charge transfer and the other one on radiolysis of DNA. So what we have to describe and simulate at the very beginning is the interaction between a ionizing radiation. In my case, I will take ions that are going fast with molecules. So I take here, this is a guanine base. And so what is expected to happen is an excitation of the electron cloud when the projectile is going through the electron cloud, either by inelastic collision, so the projectile goes straight, or the projectile can be deviated, and this is called elastic collision. And eventually, if there is enough energy deposited, some electrons will be expelled. These are the secondary electrons, and holes will be formed on the molecule. So this is what we have to describe. What we want to understand is how energy is deposited and how it will relax and dissipate in the very first time scale. And also, because we have shaped the electron density a lot, we should see charge migration process, so the electron cloud should move, so the charge will redistribute on the system. So to do that, I will skip on. To do that, we use density functional theory in its time-dependent version. So these are equations developed discovered in the 80s, and this is using here the Kohn-Sham framework. So we consider, you heard about that the other day, we consider Kohn-Sham molecular orbital phi I for each of the electrons of the system. And so these time-dependent functions give you the evolution of these Kohn-Sham MOs as a function of the kinetic energy operator and what is called the Kohn-Sham potential, which is depending on time in our case. So these are equations of motions that gives you the evolution of the MOs. So the Kohn-Sham potential, it has terms representing the repulsion among electrons, all the exchange correlation effects. In our case, I will not dwell into that, but we work under the adiabatic approximation. And the external potential, which is especially important here for us because it is where we will introduce the interaction with the projectile. So if we consider a proton, we have a +1 charge that will traverse the electron cloud, and so the potential created by this proton will enter the Kohn-Sham potential here. So usually we treat projectiles that have very high kinetic energy, sometimes close to the speed of light, and so the potential is described by this relativistic Liénard-Richert potential that gives you the potential as a function of the charge of the projectile, the distance to a given electron, and the speed of the ratio of the speed of the projectile with the speed of light, and also an angle theta between the projectile trajectory and the axis between the electron and the projectile. So this is a potential which goes back to a standard Coulomb potential if you are at low energy, and if you are at very high energy, then you have a potential which is not spherically symmetric anymore. So doing real-time simulation, I forgot to tell you, but what we are doing, we will simulate with computer, with propagation algorithms, these equations over time. So there are various, this is well known in the literature. We borrowed what was already published and we adapted what was already published. So how to propagate this equation in time. So I will not go into detail because these are some of the papers. This is well known. What was the originality of the work was to look for a very efficient implementation. So this was the work of Xiaoqing, who was PhD in the group, and so she developed a real-time TDDFT module in Daemon2K in the framework of auxiliary DFT that Professor Koster talked about a lot the other day. So I guess you are familiar with that. So it's an implementation where we completely avoid force centers integral thanks to the use of variationally fitted density. So this is, I can go into detail if you want later, but I prefer to go fast and show you later, I prefer to show you an example of application. So we have validated the implementation, well, Xiaoqing validated. So it is correct. We checked also that the auxiliary density functional theory framework was safe for real-time propagation. And this is effectively the case as soon as you use good enough auxiliary basis set like GNA2 star. In the case we investigated, we couldn't see any strong difference in the evolution of the density when using auxiliary density. We also benchmarked the capability of the methodology to evaluate precisely the ionization probabilities of molecule here by alpha particles. And so it compares, there are not so many experiments, but when we have experiments, it compares quite well with experiments. And finally, something that was important for us was to have a very efficient implementation. So thanks to the work of Xiaoqing and Karim, who is still a software engineer, we really optimized the code. And to give you an idea, now you can, with Daemon, treat molecular systems which have a few hundreds of atoms, up to 1,000 of atoms, in a quite routine manner. So this is, I think, one of the most efficient implementation of real-time TDDFT so far. So we have two types of implementation, supplementary implementations that are needed in our case, because we want to treat biological systems that are really huge. So as I just said, we can only treat only a few hundred of atoms. And of course, biological systems, they have thousands of atoms. So to improve the situation, we have developed a polarizable QMMM implementation. So building on the QMMM implementation that was already present in Daemon, but we updated it to include polarizable force field. So it means that we will describe electron dynamics on the QM region, and on the fly, the environment will hold induced dipoles that will adapt to what is taking place on the electron density. And also the induced dipoles on the environment, they will back react on the electron density. So we have really a self-consistent, if I can say, dynamics between the QM and MM region. So this is important to treat biological systems at the end. One thing that was quite interesting to remark is that we have to take into account the speed of propagation of the electric field in this type of implementation. Imagine we have the electron cloud of the QM region here, and we have an atom of the MM region here that has an induced dipole that we have to compute to reflect the polarization of the induced dipole. So the induced dipole, it is determined, the induced dipole nu, it is determined from the electric field felt felt by the atom at a given time. And it depends on its polarizability alpha. But in fact, the electric field, they travel at the speed of light. And so if you have your system, your atom here, which is, let's say, at 12 angstroms from the electron cloud, it means that it takes a few attoseconds for the electric field to propagate from the electron cloud to the atom. And the same if now we have an induced dipole creating a certain electric field here, it takes some time to reach the electron cloud and to act on the electron cloud. And so this is because the speed of light is approximately 3 angstrom per attosecond. So the implementation we have is taking into account this delay in the propagation of the field. So that was quite fun to implement and to realize this and to implement. Another thing which is important is the capability to go beyond. So what I just showed, real-time DFT, it allows you to work on the very, very bottom or right or left part of the graph, so purely electron dynamics, where the nuclei do not move. So we describe ionization and electron dynamics. But to then describe the response of the nuclei, we need to introduce nuclear motion. So this was the work of Aurelio, who did a really beautiful work when he was postdoc with us. He developed a mixed quantum classical simulation where the electrons are treated by real-time DFT, as I just showed, with the Liouville von Neumann equation. And the nuclei, we consider them as classical particles that evolve according to Newton's laws. And so what we describe is a mean field dynamics where the nuclei move in the field of the created by the electron density. So this is not BOND simulation, because here what we use is not the time-independent Kohn-Sham equation or Schrödinger equation. It is the Liouville von Neumann, which is a time-dependent function. So this is a code that is now working and that allows us, in principle, to go now and cover this non-adiabatic electron dynamic situation. So this is one part of the work, of the developments we did, well, to do the propagation, to do the simulation. But it is not enough. It's a good thing to do the simulation. But the second thing is to analyze the simulation to get insights. And so there is also a need in this field, which is not so developed, to have tools to analyze what is taking place during the dynamics. And especially with Julien Pinet in Paris, we extended a type of methodologies that are called the topological analysis to the time-dependent regime. And so we have considered various quantities. One is the electron density, the other one is the electron localization function. The other day, some of the speakers talked about this type of function. And also we looked at the divergence of the currents. So what we did was to try to perform topological analysis for time-dependent function. And one which is especially interesting is this ELF function, because it has been, well, this has been known in the case of stationary regime for now 20 years, that when you analyze this type of function, here in the case of water, you can recover basically the Lewis structure of the molecule. So these are really powerful tools to analyze with a chemical perspective the electron density. And you recognize here, well, you have the oxygen here, hydrogen and hydrogen, and these big balloons that you see are represent what we call bassins that can be associated to the Lewis structure. And in particular, you can find a basin that corresponds to the core shell of the oxygen atom. These two balloons are the OH bonds, and here you can recognize two regions where the electron will tend to be paired that will correspond to the lone pairs of the oxygen. So what we did was to extend this type of methodology to the case of time-dependent function. So I will show you an example of one water hit by a very, very fast alpha particle or a slower alpha particle. This is the kinetic energy. Here the energy that will be deposited is really small, because the projectile you will see is going so fast that the electrons do not have time to respond to the collision. Here it will be different. This is spoiling my simulation. Up, I go back. Up. Yeah, okay. So you see it has been very fast, and after the collision, you see that okay, the intensity, the health is changing a little bit, but not so much. You see some Rabi oscillations basically. And now, if you look on the right, the projectile, you see even before you have part of the density that attached to the molecule, to the projectile, and the projectile also leaves with part of the density. And after that, well, you see that there is no anymore standard Lewis structure for water, and this is because there is so much energy deposited in the system that the electron structure blow out. So doing the topological analysis is useful because we can really quantify what is taking place during the process. Here, for example, if you look at the moment of the collision, in the middle, you see the alpha particle. It has no core shell, no electrons are attached around the alpha particle, because the projectile is going so fast that the electrons do not have time to attach. Here it is different. You see that when the alpha particle is close to the oxygen atom, already part of the density is starting to make a core shell around the alpha particle. And this you can access with this type of topological analysis. You can quantify. And especially, I think it's behind the slide, but at the end, you see also you can quantify the attachment of the electron density on the projectile. And you can say here that the projectile is leaving with approximately 0.8 electrons. So this is the type of methodology that we have developed and that we continue to develop. So I will try to now give you two examples of applications. So the first one is related to the question of ultra-fast electron transfer in uridine monophosphate. So this was in fact one of the interrogations we had in the group and in the lab more generally. It was to understand the reactivity that is taking place. Well, I can go fast, but a little bit close to what I showed you before. But was one of the things we still don't know is the reactivity of these very short species. What is taking place really just after ionization. And so we have colleagues in the group that are doing very beautiful experiments under the supervision of Professor Mostafavi with what we call picosecond pulse radiolysis. So what we mean by this, these are the type of experiment where you induce ionization, here with a very energetic beam of electrons, and then you can record with a picosecond resolution what is taking place in the sample by doing absorption spectrum. So you record absorption spectrum at every picosecond, and so you can follow the chemical species that are formed and disappear. And this is almost unique in Europe. There are no other setup of that type in Europe. And so what Professor Mostafavi did was to investigate this uracil monophosphate in water. And this is what he did. So he did the radiolysis. And there is one thing that you find in all textbooks, and I think which is quite relevant, is to consider that the probability of ionization is only proportional to the electron density. This is because this type of excitation are so gigantic that what is counting to know if the molecule will be ionized is to know if there is a lot or not a lot of electrons. What I mean by this is that if I count the number of electrons on the phosphate group, on the sugar group, or the base group, I have these numbers, which are approximately the same. And so in principle, when you irradiate a sample, you have equivalent chance finally to hit each of these fragments. And roughly you should have 1/3 of forming a hole on the base, a hole on the sugar, a hole on the phosphate, approximately. Because this is a type of excitation that are not selective at all. So they did the experiment, but what they found is that 5 picoseconds after the pulse, so the very best resolution they can get, they don't have this species at all, not formed at all. they only have this one. So only the signature, spectroscopic signature is well known, and only this species. Eventually this one, but this species would absorb in a very high UV range, and it is not detectable. So this, they cannot say for sure it's not present, but they couldn't see. But what is sure is that you don't have this base ionized at all 5 picoseconds after the. So it means that there is a mechanism between, if we trust this type of picture, there is a mechanism that allows very fast charge transfer from, if you have formed the hole here, there should be a sub-picosecond charge transfer from the phosphate to the base. But they did not know, as experimental people, what was the mechanism for that. So that's where we started to understand, to think about what could be done in terms of computations. And we thought about 2 types of mechanism. One could be a charge mechanism process, meaning that, okay, the projectile is hitting this base, it's making a hole, but then the electron cloud is so excited that maybe the sea of electron is moving, and part of the electron density from the phosphate will migrate to the base at the femtosecond time scale. This is a type of phenomenon called charge migration that is really popular currently in the physics, in the attophysics, attosecond physics community. And we wanted to, if this could be a possible mechanism. Another mechanism would be a more standard Marcus theory-like electron transfer, which is driven by the motion of the nuclei, and I will come back on this. And so we decided to investigate both mechanisms, and we did that with Dimon Tucker. So we are doing MD simulation, DFT MM simulation. The setup is this one, I will come back on this, but we have the UPS molecule at the center, solvated by water, and beyond 27 angstrom, we have a continuum model. So we start by the charge migration process, using this real-time TDDFT methodology that I just showed, and using this polarizable QMML. So these are some details. So we put in the QM region the uracil and the first solvation shell. And so what we will do is to irradiate, so alpha particle on the base, either perpendicular, longitudinal, or on the sugar. So what is taking place? You have 2 movies here. This one is showing you the deformation of the density with respect to initial time, to the ground state. So you saw that the alpha particle went there and starts to be shaped. And this one is another picture. It is the instantaneous derivative of the electron density. So where it's showing you the time